know your neighbors. So I hope that you'll see today, I think that there is considerable wisdom in intentionally forming community around you, right next door. Learning to love your next door neighbors, because your neighbors are the community that God has placed you into to bless and also to be blessed. So last week we looked at the reason behind the command to love your neighbors as yourself, and how it's tied closely to the command to love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. This is because God's love in us must be extended to others all around us. We love others because God first loved us, and His love propels us, is the impetus behind it for us to love others. So loving our neighbors is a defining characteristic of what it means to be a believer, to follow Jesus. So we talked about loving our neighbors in more of a general sense, or in principle. Today I want to narrow our focus a bit and to provide an example of what loving our neighbors looks like in a particular context. So we're going to turn to Proverbs 27:10. Don't have a screen, so if you have a Bible or an app, you can turn to Proverbs 27:10. So Solomon in Proverbs 27:10 says, "Don't abandon your friend or your father's friend, and don't go to your brother's house in your time of calamity. Better a neighbor nearby than a brother far away. Don't abandon your friend or your father's friend, and don't go to your brother's house in a time of calamity. Better a neighbor nearby than a brother far away." This passage reveals, I think, some advice that we often can overlook. Solomon is advising us that there is great value in having dependable relationships with people close by, over family that might live far away. So might there be a reason to invest in people closest to you, your next door neighbors? You see, when we read stories like the Good Samaritan, like we did last week, most people will come to the conclusion that loving our neighbors means loving everyone. And this is true. It's definitely true. We ought to love everyone God brings into our sphere of influence. We ought to be a good neighbor to everyone. Because just as the expert in religious law learned in the Good Samaritan story, it's not about defining who our neighbor is, but about choosing to simply be the good neighbor. So neighbor can, and it certainly does mean everyone. But if we just leave it there, I think that we can fall into a trap. We can get lost in vagueness. When we just leave loving our neighbors at its broadest sense, even though it's true, loving our neighbors can end up just staying as this beautiful metaphor. Love everyone. But when we aim at everyone, sometimes we hit nothing. But I think even though Jesus certainly wants us to love everyone, to love the poor, love the wounded, it can be easy to overlook an obvious group. Our actual next-door neighbors. So in addition to thinking of our neighbors as anyone that God places into our lives, that we might be able to show His love for, I think we cannot overlook the fact that God has placed us into our particular context, around a particular group of people, our literal neighbors. Did you guys know that your next door neighbors are real people with real names, with real phone numbers, real desires and dreams? Obviously, I'm being a little cheeky here, but the truth is that so many of us have lived with the same next-door neighbors for years and years, maybe decades, and many of us don't really know them. I was going to have a little slide up here with an activity. I'll try to just describe it. It would have been kind of the chart of shame at the end of it, but that the point of the activity wasn't to bring about shame, but just to open up our eyes a little bit. But basically, imagine 9 squares, or a grid of 3 by 3 squares. And in that middle square is your house. And then all the squares surrounding that are the neighbors around you. Obviously, you might not live in that exact arrangement, but you're surrounded by people around you. So whoever your 8 closest neighbors are, that's what I want you to imagine. And in each one of those boxes representing a different home for a neighbor, I want you to think of 3 subpoints. A, the names of the people living in that house. B is any relevant information that you might be able to glean, not by just standing in your driveway and looking at them, but by actually having a real conversation with them. Like Ross is from Brandon, Manitoba, or Sheila is a semi-professional cross-country skier. So some basic information about them. And then C is like an in-depth personal information about them. Something that you can only gather about them through relationship. Like, what are their dreams, desires? Do they want to have kids one day? What do they think about God? So I'll give you guys just a minute to think about that. Are you able to, for your 8 neighbors around you, do you know their names? Do you know some basic information? And do you know some in-depth information? Just think about that for a moment. How did you guys do with that? Did this become a bit of a chart of shame like it did for me? But if it did, don't worry, because you're not alone. And in fact, 10% of people who have done this exercise could only fill out the names for all 8 neighbors. Only 10% of people knew the names of all 8 neighbors. Only 3% could fill out line B and knew some basic information about them. And only 1% of people knew some in-depth information for all their neighbors. So just pause there and take a minute to consider what that means. Because did Jesus not say to love our neighbors? You bet he did. But you might say, I'm serving downtown at the homeless shelter, or I'm sending money overseas to help orphans, or I'm trying to love my enemies by bringing my boss coffee every morning. And those are all amazing things, and we shouldn't stop doing that. But I think it's easy to forget, the even more basic level of loving neighbors. We got to get back to the basics, to loving our actual next door neighbors. But it's hard to love our neighbors when you don't even know them. For so many of us, our next door neighbors are these mysterious enigmas that we might have concocted all kinds of stories about. You might have these invisible families living right beside you that you've never actually met, but you know they exist. You've seen signs of life over there. You know there's a dad. You've seen him most mornings leaving his driveway at 7:45 a.m. in his blue Toyota Corolla. He's always wearing a golf shirt, pressed pants. You probably think he works at YTG. Maybe you regularly give him a friendly wave when you take out the garbage together on Thursdays. You might even say, "Beautiful day, huh?" You might want to say more, but you don't know his name. And you feel bad because you've been his neighbor for 10 years. You know he's married, he's got 3 kids, but that is all. And the less that we know about people, the easier it is to judge. Maybe you're getting a little tired of his unkept lawn. I'll tell you, my neighbors are probably getting tired of our lawn, but I just got a mower, okay? So now it's good. Maybe you don't like that, when you're sitting down to have dinner after a long day and just want some peace and quiet, all you can hear is kids screaming next door because they're pretending they're Spartans at war. So, we can come up with all kinds of stories about our neighbors based on the little glimpses of their lives that we get. We think that the guy next door is lazy because he doesn't cut his lawn. We might make judgments on their parenting because their kids are always being loud. But these judgments, these fabricated stories about our neighbors, we really don't know can actually be obstacles that prevent us from befriending them. And I think that is so sad because I believe that it's not by chance that you live where you live in the time that you live. I believe that God has you where you are for a purpose, for you and for them. And certainly part of that plan is to reveal the love of God where you are. I think of the story of Joseph, who his brothers sold into slavery out of jealousy. God used a seemingly tragic situation and turned it into one that not only blessed Joseph's life, but also used Joseph to literally save thousands of people from a terrible famine. Upon reuniting with his brothers after many years, Joseph calms his brothers' fears by saying in Genesis 50:20, "You planned evil against me. God planned it for good to bring about the present result, the survival of many people." God planned it for good. What was intended for evil, God planned it for good. God places us in situations for His purposes. So do you think that this might extend to where you live, with who you are surrounded by? So what do you think could happen if you got to know the people in your neighborhood and they got to know you? And that's where I think that we can draw some wisdom from Proverbs 27:10. Without minimizing family, I think that a lot of times we assign all important support activities to our families. But the problem is that most of us don't have family close by, unless you're one of the lucky ones. And I am one of the lucky ones. My parents live here. Family is amazing at stepping in times of need. My parents are a lifeline for me in so many ways. I have the advantage of them being close. But there's times when they're busy renovating people's houses all the time. And so I have to think, who is a part of my support network? Solomon seems to make some really solid points about the possibilities of who we could turn to in times of calamity. We should be seeking to build and maintain relationships with others because in times of need, friends and neighbors should be able to provide support similar to family. Solomon says, don't abandon your friends or your father's friends. Even though they might not be blood relatives, friends and neighbors can still step in and support you when you need it. The most potent point that Solomon makes here is that friends nearby, neighbors, are in a unique position that they are able to provide immediate help. Not everyone has the advantage that I do with parents close by. But even with that advantage, there are circumstances that can be really time sensitive, and having that dependable neighbor next door becomes so critical. But many of us, especially up here in the north in Whitehorse, have families living all across the country. It's not so easy to call up your brother and say, "Hey, Chris, I'm feeling kind of sick right now. Do you mind catching the next flight and helping me take my kids to school? Can you be here real fast? And I imagine, back in Solomon's day, where even short distances took much longer to travel. Even though Solomon probably had the Mercedes-Benz of all camels, it still would have taken quite some time to get across town. But if you invest in the people around you and intentionally form up friendships with your neighbors, then even they can be a support when you need it. But for this kind of mutual support between friends, and especially between neighbors, it takes intentionality. It takes courage. It takes vulnerability to build a solid community around you. But I think that it's so important. And I think in Solomon's short little proverb, he wants us to see that your next door neighbor can be an extension of family. Your next door neighbor could be an extension of family. It's so easy to stay within the walls of friendships and family and keep your doors closed. It's easy to only reach out to direct family members or best friends when we're struggling. But what if the support you could have or you can offer is with the people that are right next door? Are we engaging and getting to know our neighbors well enough that they can be our family? This is the desire that I've had for a while. But I saw it in a different way. There was a period of time when I was living in Comox Valley where I was frustrated with feeling so isolated, frustrated with not having family nearby when we were going through a tough time of being first-time parents, raising kids. I was frustrated that I didn't have many friends, or the friends that I did have weren't the friends of the past. I knew that there was a better way of living. I knew that we were designed for relationship, for fellowship, for deep life-on-life living with each other that involves, mutual love and sharing and supporting each other. I wanted to escape that sort of Western mindset that says, you must fend for yourself. You must be self-reliable. You had to be the maker and sustainer of your own destiny kind of thinking. I hated that. And so the answer to this yearning in my heart, I thought, was forming an intentional community. Buy a plot of land somewhere, build some homes, create a central gathering spot to foster fellowship, have a shared garden, shared tools, share in the hardship of taking care of home and property and, raising kids together kind of thing. And I know, some of you are thinking, sounds kind of like a cult. Someone has a cool idea about a perfect little commune, and things get weird. But this would have been different. Would have been different, okay? I just wanted to build a community of good neighbors, as I knew the Bible instructed us. But the thing is that I thought that I had to leave my current context that God planted me in and create my own version. I desired an intentional community where you love and are loved by the people all around you. But I never had to go somewhere else for that. I was supposed to do that right where I was at. It doesn't start with a plot of land, the perfectly arranged homes, the shared garden. It just starts with one person being intentional to get to know your neighbor. And I didn't do that. I didn't really understand that until more recently. And maybe the greatest disappointment of that time is not that I missed out on receiving that support that I most desired, in a tough time of raising kids. And it's not that I missed out on this perfect commune. It's that I missed out on the opportunity that God put before me to be a reflection of His love to the people around me. It's so easy to live our lives without interacting with our neighbors next door, or just to keep those interactions shallow, superficial. That cursory wave, or that, obligatory morning. But we are called to live out of love. When we remain in God's love and His love in us, that should always move us from beyond our family and our church community and into the world around us. And I would say, especially to those that God has placed next door. Because how our neighbors see us live and speak and do life is a reflection of all that we are learning on Sunday mornings and what we believe. Are they seeing the gospel through their interactions with you? Next door neighbors are more than just a supportive network that Solomon speaks of, even though that alone is a wonderful reason to pursue friendship with our neighbors. Being neighbors presents us with the God-given opportunity to live out our calling to be ambassadors of Christ. In 2 Corinthians 5:20, it says, "Therefore we are ambassadors for Christ, since God is making His appeal through us. We plead on Christ's behalf. Be reconciled to God." God is making His appeal to the world around us through us. We are His chosen instruments to bring the gospel to the nations. And that includes being able to share the good news clearly with your words, but to even more fundamentally be able to live out the good news by living lives of love that overflow from God's love within us. When Jesus says to love your neighbors as yourself, He is certainly saying to love your actual next door neighbors. So James and Sheila Boutwell took it to heart that God planted them into a specific context. God used their willingness to serve the needs of that neighborhood around them, and they not only blessed the people around them, but they were equally blessed too with friendships for life. But most importantly, they got to be witnesses for Christ and to reveal the reason for which they were living out of love. And just like James and Sheila, our next door neighbors are our direct community that God has put us into for our benefit, for the care and good of those people, but also as a mission field. So let me ask you guys, are you forming an intentional community with the people that God has placed in your lives around you, with your neighbors? Are you investing time and energy into getting to know your neighbors because you know that it's not by chance that you live beside them? Or do you find yourself stuck in that sort of time warp of day after day just going through the mechanical motions of being a good neighbor? You know, saying hi, good morning, how you doing? Maybe you even, do some tasks every once in a while to help out. Maybe you've brought some baked goods over. And this is great and super meaningful. But do you know your neighbors? Do you know your neighbor's history? Do you know their dreams and desires? Do you know their pain, their struggle? Do they know yours? Have you opened up the doors in your heart to allow your neighbor in? And I get that it's an investment of time, of energy, of willingness, of vulnerability. But God has a way of doubling up on those investments and producing something that far outweighs whatever we put in. So I only really have one challenge this week because I totally understand that getting to know our next door neighbors is a challenge. It can be overwhelming. Today's challenge is really just the starting place that I hope some momentum can build from. So the challenge is, what are your neighbors' names? Go and ask them this week. And it might be awkward if you've seen them and waved to them for 10 years, but you don't know their name. But it's a starting place. Find out your neighbors' names this week. I've lived in our house for 2 years now, and I only know the names of my direct two neighbors on either side. There's a guy that lives 2 doors down that I wave to, when he leaves in the morning, and I don't know his name. 2 doors down. So this is a challenge not just for you, but for me as well. I want to know the people that live near me. I want to influence them and be influenced by them. I want to share God's love with them. So today I believe that Jesus is inviting us into a mission, one that has the potential to make a real and lasting impact on the community around us. And it starts with just taking the call to love our neighbors seriously and literally, and applying that to the people that are right around you. But that small investment of intentional love and relationship forming has the potential, I think, to alter neighborhoods. Imagine that if you decided you were going to invest in the lives of just a few people that live closest to you. And imagine if that inspired those people to do the same. What if they then went out and did the same thing? You know, a chain reaction can start to form. God's love can start to reshape a whole community by one simple act of love. And I know this can seem like a fantasy sometimes, but I think that God has no limits, and He loves to show off when we trust Him. So this week, let's heed Solomon's wisdom and advice and begin forming an extension of our family by intentionally investing and loving the people that God has placed next door to us. It'll bless you, it'll bless others, and you'll be building far more than relationships. You'll be building with Jesus and investing in advancing His kingdom across the whole world. And you can begin that today by simply loving your next door neighbors. Let's pray. Thank you, Father, for the simple gospel, Father. That you died for our sins. That you love us so much and you want the whole world to know that. And thank you that you place us on mission to bring this good news all around us, Lord. Would you just ignite in us, in our hearts, a love for the people that you place us near, our next door neighbors. Help us to see them with love and to get excited to get to know them, Lord. Would you enlarge our hearts for our neighbors, to share our life with theirs? Would you help us this week to step out in some boldness and to trust you to do all the transformation? Help us just to take a small step of obedience this week, Lord, and get to know our neighbors. Thank you for what you are going to do through our acts of obedience. We love you, Lord. Amen. So good to have you guys here this morning, and if you would like prayer for anything or just to chat, I'd love to speak with you afterwards. Other than that, I hope you guys have a wonderful week. Go in peace.